Thank you, Anna Christina. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you so much for the great opportunity. I know both yourself and Jerry were very supportive in providing this chance to kind of share where the youth movement has been going since, in fact, 2011 and the Christchurch earthquakes, which is very much the origins of Youth Beyond Disasters and where we've been in the past. And also thank you particularly for Jerry for joining our Children Youth Forum and recently over the past day and sharing your experience with the youth participants there at the forum as well. I kind of feel that it reminds me a bit of my high school days back when I was doing senior athletics, and I feel it's a bit of a relay, and it's kind of the youth is kind of like the last part of that journey there, where over the past the session here, I've had the great privilege of listening and sharing and hearing from much more experienced practitioners around the frameworks that exist in the current countries and how we can, how as youth and as volunteers we can, what our role is within that context. And in that same philosophy as well, I think that when you think of say a 200 by 4 relay, it's one of those moments when the baton is passed between one generation and another that's so crucial that we assess how that occurs in a way that that baton isn't dropped, so that the great work that is being done by yourselves and all the different organizations isn't lost to the next generation moving forwards as well. So I thank you for that, and I hope that in the context of this discussion I can share a little bit more about where we're trying to head and learn more from how perhaps we can improve the current direction of where we're going as well. Next slide, please. Thanks. So regionally, the organisation Youth Beyond Disasters is something that did actually originate out of the Christchurch earthquakes as well. So in 2011, in February, as you would have heard from Mayor Daziel, what actually happened out of that, which was quite unique, was as she shared around Sam Johnson, some of the work around there, was this notion of spontaneous volunteering. Suddenly, what came about that was 11,000 volunteers that had been mobilized, that had not necessarily had any training whatsoever, but just had this kind of urge, this kind of need to reach out to other humans and to help others that were in their community. And from that as well, what came about was an interest from both ISDR as well as from UNESCO in how do we learn from this experience, how do we work better with these volunteers, and how do we engage with a broader section of society to benefit from this as well. Because one of the key things that came out of that was we learned that 11,000 volunteers is a lot of people to manage. And as much as Mayor Daziel suggested that one of the key recommendations was to make a conscious decision to embrace with youth, emerging leaders and change makers. One thing that we learned within the youth constituency was that we needed to learn to engage much better with organizations and national disaster management organizations, because we were essentially organizing in a very ad hoc fashion. It wasn't something that we were experienced in. And there were issues around insurance, there were issues around management of volunteers, and it's something that we've learnt much better now over the course of supporting other disasters, such as in the Philippines, in the US, in Japan, that the most meaningful way forward is really to engage with these other organizations and partner with them in providing a much more structured and coordinated response. These are some of the areas where we've been kind of sharing our experiences and I guess engaging with youth from a cross-section of a variety of areas, but mainly in the Asia-Pacific region so far. So there's in Indonesia, in Padang, in the 6 AMC DRR, in Bangkok recently this year, in Manila, in Philippines, and in 5 AMC DRR as well. So we've been quite active in this region, and so far we have around about well over about 500 within our network there, and around about youth that have created between 200 to 300 action plans that operate at the grassroots level, and they're essentially all youth-led and for youth as well. Next slide, please. We've also been, most recently, we've been connecting through the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. So I'll share a little bit about that further, about our forum, which we're holding in conjunction with a public forum and as a part of the WCDRR. So we've taken an active stance and recognized that these lessons that come out at the grassroots level are so important in informing policies as well. And in the most recent preparatory committee, PrepCom 2, we actually even suggested that having a target around preparedness and building back better was something that should be considered by within the actual formation of the HFA2 as well, because it's such a crucial component that needs to be assessed. So here is us in fact, Rio 2012, as well as at the global platform. That was a response down the bottom where we were in Fiji and going out to support the communities there in their recovery efforts after Tropical Cyclone Evan, and then also over there at the World Conference on Youth as well. So these issues we're recognizing within the youth constituency that disaster risk reduction and broad environmental concerns is a huge area of concern for us, and we're trying to start to develop programs and initiatives specifically around this. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into too much into detail there. That's essentially just our history, which was shared briefly. And if anybody is interested after, I can get into more detail about where we are and some of our next few areas we're working in. Next slide. Next, maybe. So as I said, it was a project that essentially started out of Christchurch. When we think of youth, I mean, one of the key things there is the connectiveness of youth as well. So in terms of recovery, I know, Akram, you shared before previously about the lack of communication facilities in a recovery scenario. One of the strengths of the youth as well in what we do in our work is how connected we are, how well we know each other, and our ability to be able to, in many senses, whether we have the communication technology or not, transcend that and get in touch with each other. So this was an example, as Mayor Dazil shared, where we were able to mobilize 11,000 youth simply through a Facebook page as well. A similar example comes from the Philippines, where, in fact, after after Yolanda, a huge amount of grassroots youth-led initiatives came out from the youth sector. One of which I know quite well around youth that were able to set up a database that collected missing persons indexes, that was youth that connected and provided through the legal association, so young lawyers and young professionals providing advice to support legal claims and legal aid claims around insurance as well. So I mean, there's a plethora of examples of where youth have engaged and have been able to provide some substantial support. In that Philippines case, there was around 18,000 legal aid support claims that through the Philippines youth were able to support as well. Next slide. So in the current Children Youth Forum, which we have, it's a 7-day forum held in conjunction with a public forum, benefiting from a collaboration with IRP, or discussions with IRP last year when we met with Anna Christina. Recovery was highlighted as a very key area, and we wanted to continue that towards the construction of, as you suggested, a guidance note around recovery for children and youth. Before we did that, though, we felt that it was quite important that we understood what was the feelings and the sentiments of the constituency, and what are the experiences that they had that we might be able to build into such a guidance note that might have case studies that we could incorporate in there as well. So within the Children Youth Forum, we have 6 tools that form a toolbox for resilience. And the 6th tool of that, which everyone here is more than welcome to join. In fact, as we speak right now, the 4 breakout sessions here that are shown are actually currently being held. So we have one which is around coping with disasters and mental health and disaster recovery. Back at home, I'm also a volunteer. I've been 10 years a volunteer with the State Emergency Service, which looks after floods, storms, tsunamis, but I'm also a volunteer with the Australian Red Cross. And one of the areas that we look at the Australian Red Cross, there's around psychological first aid. And so I think one area here which perhaps hasn't been touched on so much within the discussion so far is around the role of perhaps peer-to-peer support and training, and also around art and storytelling in healing in the recovery process. So mental health is certainly a key issue when you consider that recovery in the Christchurch context is anticipated to last between 10 to 50 years. So, I mean, recovery is certainly generational. And in being generational, it's something that, you need to adapt to. And from a very emotional level, it's very difficult for the younger generation sometimes to grasp. Particularly when you look at children that are particularly vulnerable in these circumstances. The names of the breakouts are there, but community-driven response around recovery, so that and using the Christchurch context as well, resilient response and disaster triage, adaptive capacities and organizational change. I just wanted to touch on that last one, adaptive capacities and organizational change, and I think relate this back to your comments there, Dr. McKesser, around the golden window of opportunity. I think that in any disaster scenario, there's such an opportunity to learn from there, but also create new kind of transformational learning and new pathways for engagement and development. One thing that I will share is that when we talk about build back better, safer, and faster, on one hand, while it's so important to get the community back on its feet as soon as possible, it's also very important that we learn during that period of time as well, and we don't build back so fast that we're not kind of benefiting from that learning there. But at the same time, it's such a small opportunity, it's such a small window that we have to access as well. But there certainly is that ability to learn during that period of time. And the final one was panel discussion 6, which is volunteers building back better, which we're actually holding later tonight at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Children Youth Forum. Next slide. The general direction and I guess the policy of the Children Youth constituencies around encouraging children and youth to be perceived much more as partners for resilience rather than vulnerable communities that are beneficiaries of aid. We feel that we have a strong role to play within in both decision-making and implementation around recovery. And as you can see there, next slide. And as a whole, mobilization is probably where we started. We started out of the Christchurch earthquakes, learning as we on the fly, quite fluidly, about what needed to happen. As a result of that, though, we've recognized that it's quite important that we capture this learning in the form of research and look at how we engage with the agencies and the scientific community in developing, I guess, greater learning. So, and as an example of that, we're currently working in discussion with FAO in China, in Beijing, about collaborating with universities that have a specialty around agricultural resilience. And so how we develop climate and disaster-proof agricultural crops. And this would be a process where the university postgraduate students would contribute to FAO suggested research, and they'd benefit from the support from FAO as well. So, I mean, we're trying to build these partnerships in various capacities in different areas. The Law Association was one, and the medical, the International Federation of Medical Students Association is also doing a lot around the health spheres as well. And the other part is advocacy, which is why we are here and we are holding a 7-day Children Youth Forum that covers at least 50 different breakouts. And we've essentially had over 200 youth from around the world, many of them being self-funded, making the conscious decision that this is an area that's important to us and that we need to be here in this platform to make our voice heard. Next slide. Look, I mean, I think these are examples of pictures that we're quite familiar with. This is in Indonesia, in Yogyakarta, and these are the types of things that we're trying to avoid, but just to share again that recovery is a long-term process that requires healing. And next slide. And where we're really focusing on within our constituencies, looking at these guys here, because it's the little fellas that we're really looking after, and the ones that within 10 to 20 years will be making decisions, and ourselves within 10 years will be in those positions of power that we can influence and affect change. So it's quite important that we ensure that these these guys, as they grow and during that recovery process, they're not left out of the picture, and that what we do supports their needs and takes into account of their abilities as well. Next slide. HFA, next slide, really. That's just trying to say we're on a pathway at the moment to look at how, in a very structured manner, how we can incorporate ourselves within the current post-2015 framework, which we're pleased to say that in the framework it does suggest the need to address a unique space and the modalities for children and youth to participate within that framework. Yet at the same time, there's no specific targets or indicators, and we're currently working with organizations like ODI and drilling down into their targets and indicators that they published and looking at what are the specific children and youth components of that. And from that process, one of the other areas which we were working on is, as shared, is looking at how we can perhaps look at a specific guidance note around recovery that relates to children and youth. Next slide. Finally, just to say, as a constituency, we don't only work around the area of disaster risk reduction. Just next slide. Yeah. So, I mean, we work across a variety, just I think press a few times. We work across a variety of areas. We're currently tapping into the global governance participation, the World Humanitarian Summit process, Habitat 3 around existing urbanization in cities today. So, I mean, it's just to say that we're active in a variety of areas, and we're hoping to learn and continue to learn. At 1 o'clock today, we also have a bit of a plug for, we're launching a UNESCO-published toolkit. So this is a toolkit that benefits from learning from around 1,000 participants, youth participants that have participated in this learning over the past 3 years since the Christchurch earthquakes, which has been captured in a book that will help guide governments and NGOs in terms of how we can create these forums where youth can sit and share their experiences and learn from each other. And that goes back to that initial point where we were saying that it's so important that we provide that space for children and youth to have a place to sit down, share their experiences, their grievances. Sometimes it's a very emotional experience where you have them breaking down, and other times it's moments when, you know, that they won't share these feelings with anyone else, but be in a safe space when they know they're around other youth that have experienced the same thing. They feel comfortable in kind of letting go and sharing that. And I think this is the importance of why we need to have these forums and why we continue to help building capacity within that youth constituency. I think that's the end of my slide there, but if there's any other questions, we'd love to help answer. And I'd also like to say thank you so much. I can see that there's some fantastic youth that are in here in the room as well. Thank you so much for joining here today. And you guys are really the change makers here. So we're all here representing each other. So thank you so much for joining.